A couple by the name of Chester and Dora Fronczak of Chicago had a baby in 1963 that was stillborn. These are the most heartbreaking moments I can remember when I think about my years as a labor and delivery nurse. I can recount the saddest days. You just never forget the families that deliver a dead baby. It's the saddest moment and the happiest of places. But sometimes they come back a year or so later and you get to care for them again. They give birth to a beautiful live-born baby and they are ecstatic. That is what happened to the Fronczaks. They had a stillborn a year before they delivered their baby boy, Paul Fronczak. He was born on April 26, 1964 in Chicago, Illinois at Michael Reese Hospital. The mom, Dora, bonded and breastfed him and spent time with him whenever he wasn't in the nursery, because back then they did put babies in the nursery to sleep, but she was falling in love with her dear newborn baby boy. Elated. She had delivered a perfect baby boy, but the elation would be short-lived. 36 hours after Paul was born, a woman dressed as a nurse entered the room and requested for the baby to be given to her. She said, the pediatrician needs to see the baby for some routine tests and I'll bring him back shortly. Dora handed over her newborn baby and she says, now, if the nurse asks you to give the baby, you give the baby. Clearly, many years later, hospital policies have, thank goodness, have changed. Procedures have changed. We never allow babies to be carried. We always insist on the nurse's ID being in plain sight and even show the families upon admission what the ID looks like, and that in some hospitals they have a special mark that is specific to the maternity unit. We also don't allow anyone in scrubs to come in and visit or medical clothing if they're not on duty on that unit. But in 1964, things were very different and these rules and policies and procedures were not in place. The woman was dressed as a nurse, but she was not a nurse. She was a kidnapper. She left the hospital with a baby in her arms. She caught a cab and vanished. A week later, the FBI distributed an artist's rendition of the suspect, who newspapers refer to as the mystery woman. And witnesses described her as around 40-ish years old, standing about 5'4" tall, with a ruddy complexion and black, graying hair. Welcome to Left Undone, Incomplete Investigations. I'm Kathryn. We go live every Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. I'm Kathryn. Please join us there. But for now, let's talk about the twists and turns in the case of the kidnapped newborn, Paul Fronczak. So the hospital realized that the baby was gone, but did not report it to the parents or to the authorities right away. They waited several hours. They finally called Chester, the father, and told him that they had alerted authorities and that the baby had been taken. Hospital staff realized something had gone wrong and a frantic search was soon underway. At 3 p.m., they called the father, Chester, at the factory where he works as a machinist. Chester had to leave work. He had to go to the hospital and he had to tell his wife that their child was missing. In Paul Fronczak's book, Paul is quoted as saying, "You think you're safe, you're in a hospital, and that's where your baby is kidnapped." Dora, the mom, was so distraught she had to be sedated. More than 200 police officers, some with the drawing and a photo of the baby, went door to door in the neighborhoods where the taxi had dropped off the woman with the baby, the kidnapper. The main witness was the cab driver. His name was Lee Casley, I believe. He was asked to pick up a woman on the back stairs of Michael Reese Hospital and drop her off on Halstead Street, which was not that far away. The Postmaster General even enlisted 175,000 mail carriers nationwide to help, asking them to report anything suspicious, including someone on their route that suddenly had an unexplained baby. They searched 600 homes by midnight, but they did not find Paul. The FBI was involved, and yet Paul was not located. Chester Fronczak, the father, issued a plea on the news in a press conference to the kidnapper to please return the baby, and if she didn't do so immediately, to at least care for the child. At the father's request, newspapers even ran a recipe for baby formula with instructions to feed it to the newborn in 3-ounce portions every 4 hours. So we fast forward. Randomly, about a year or so later, a small child was approximately 2 years old, was found just sitting in a stroller outside of a store in Newark, New Jersey, at a very busy location. The baby was there for hours and he was sick. He had a cold. Someone reported him there, authorities came and got him, and no one claimed him, so he went into foster care. He was given the name Scott McKinley, and he was cared for by the Eckert family. And they were very fond of him, and they wanted to adopt him. They even had him baptized. But the FBI was still working on the missing Paul Fronczak case. They concluded, after looking at 10,000 plus children, that the ears of this particular child that was found in Newark, New Jersey, matched or looked like Paul Fronczak's, the Foundling's ears. They asked Dora and Chester to make the trip to New Jersey to possibly identify the child, and told them he just might be your son, Paul. They drove from Illinois to New Jersey to meet the toddler, and they decided that it just might be Paul. So they said, yes, it's him. And they legally adopted him and they raised him. Now, as you might suspect, there was pretty much zero evidence that this child was actually Paul. But they never questioned it and they raised him as Paul. When Paul was 10 years old, he went snooping in their basement. And he went into a hidden crawl space. There was a sofa in front of the crawl space entrance. He pushed it aside and went in. Paul was being nosy. He was looking for hidden Christmas presents. I remember doing that. He's actually around my age. There he discovered 3 boxes. Boxes full of letters, sympathy cards, and newspaper clippings. One headline read, 200 search for stolen baby. Another, mother asks kidnappers to return the baby. He recognized his parents in the pictures. He said they looked distraught and much younger. Then he read that their baby son, Paul Joseph, had been kidnapped. And he thought, wow, that's me. He was excited by his discovery, so he ran upstairs with a handful of the clippings to ask his mother if they were about him. And Dora was angry. She told him off for snooping. He got in trouble for snooping. Then she admitted, yes, Paul, you were kidnapped. We found you. We love you. And that's all you need to know. Paul knew not to bring up the subject again, and he didn't for another 40 years. But his curiosity was never satisfied, and often when he was alone in the house, he would sneak back into the crawl space and read more as he was growing up. Later in life, Dora told Paul that she felt she was being watched by the world, and when she was looking at the child, the toddler that they made her come look at to decide if it was Paul, she had to decide if it was her son. She said she felt pressure in a sense. She thought, I could put this child back in the system thinking he could wind up with a horrible life. Or say, yes, this is my son. She decided it was her son. She thought it would be the best thing to do. And there was no footprints, there were no fingerprints, and there definitely wasn't DNA in the 60s. Paul was put in Catholic school. They were somewhat strict in their upbringing of Paul. He liked things like rock music. He wore his hair long and never quite felt like he belonged with this family. Something was missing. At one point, his mom said something that ripped at his heart. She was angry with him. He was rebellious, and she didn't like his long hair. So she said, I wish they'd never found you. Paul says, even to this day, just thinking about it, I feel it in my soul. Paul joined a rock band in Arizona when he left home. The band broke up. He joined the army for a year. And later he worked as a salesman and even a model and an actor. He was married and divorced. And in 2008, he was married a second time to a woman named Michelle. She was a teacher, and they were soon expecting a baby girl. When the OB doctor had asked them both about their family medical history, Paul still had a feeling he wasn't really the kidnapped Paul. He always thought his brother Dave looked and acted and mannerisms were so much more like his dad, and Paul didn't resemble them at all. So being the restless guy that he was, he wanted more answers. In 2012, he went to the drugstore and he saw some paternity DNA kits. He bought them and he convinced his parents to take the test so they could know for sure if he was their son. They agreed. But before he sent the tests in, his parents begged him and said they changed their mind. Please do not send those tests in. He did debate for a week or two, but he finally said, no, I'm sending them in. I need to know the truth. So he sent them in. Soon after, he got a phone call with the results. He was at work, and the results stated that there was no remote possibility that he was the biological child of the Fronczaks. With getting these results, he became even more curious about who he was. But if he wasn't Paul, he was like, okay, these people, they don't know what happened to their child. My family that raised me, these good people, need to know what happened to their son, Paul. So if he wasn't Paul, then who was he? Where was the real Paul? He called news media for help, and this upset his parents terribly. They were very anti-news media after what happened to them in the 60s. They had been hounded by the media back then, and they did not want this to go to the news media. Paul was trying not to disrespect them, but they did not speak to him for over a year. He truly wanted to find out what happened to their kidnapped son. Paul reached out to a DNA detective group. It was led by a genetic genealogist by the name of CeCe Moore. They wound up tracing Paul's DNA to a family in Tennessee. His DNA revealed Jewish roots, and they wound up interviewing people, and they finally got a breakthrough. One of Paul's genetic relatives mentioned that there were missing twins in the family. She eventually called Paul and told him what his real name was, and that his real name was Jack Rosenthal, and that he was 6 months older than he thought. His actual birth date was October 27th, 1963. And come to find out that Jack and Dora, his mom that raised him, actually share the same birth date of October 27th. Isn't that crazy? Plus, there's a kicker. Jack had a twin sister by the name of Jill. Jack and Jill, like the nursery rhyme. But she also vanished. So now Paul has a third person to find. Paul, who now knows his name is Jack, and Jill also had siblings. They had 2 older sisters and a younger brother. It was noted that they had been badly neglected and even kept in cages at times, according to people that were interviewed. Family members recall that their kids were always crying. Nobody ever knew what happened to the twins. Family members were told they were with the other family members when asked, and then they were told they were with the other family when asked, and eventually everyone was told not to ask and not to talk about it. We do not speak of the twins. Paul feels like maybe the other twin was killed somehow. Jill might have just been dead and it was an accident, so they ditched him because answering where's one of the twins without the other might have made them get really squirrely. It made them people raise eyebrows. He even dug up the backyard in the Rosenthal's old residence looking for Jill's body. In his research, he was able to find out that his real parents were not very nice people. He states he was thankful they abandoned him, and it allowed him to be raised with the Fronczaks because they were good people and raised him well. He said they saved his life. 2 years after the fallout with the DNA results, Paul made peace with his parents, Dora and Chester. He said Dora told her that she had always felt guilty for turning Paul over to that nurse. Dora also gave Paul a photo album and letters that had been passed on by the Eckerts, the original family that he was in foster care with. The foster family, they looked after him for after a year. And remember, they even wanted to adopt him, and they baptized him. His name was Scott McKinley for them. He says, my mom had this photo album all my life and had never mentioned it. He says, it makes me kind of misty because these are the first pictures I have of me being a child. Even my real family have no baby pictures of me. He said, my grandmother had a photo album with all the kids in chronological order, and the page with the twins, Jack and Jill, was ripped out. Paul's father, Chester, has since passed away. In December of 2019, Paul wrote something in his blog at his website. His website is foundlingpaul.com. He says, hi everyone, it's Paul. We found the real Paul Fronczak more than 1 year ago in late 2018. But out of respect for his desire to remain anonymous and respect for his family, we did not go public with the story. Nor will I go into detail about it now. I hope you understand. My main mission from the start has been to reunite my mother, Dora, with the child who was taken from her so many years ago. I have always kept you informed of all my progress, and I have relied greatly on your help and support. And I will continue to rely on you all, but I know what it feels like to have your life turned upside down overnight. And I feel this man and his family deserve their privacy. Thank you, and check back soon. However, as time went on in the most recent year, the news seemed to uncover the true identity of Paul Fronczak. Watch this clip.
Southern Nevada man who's been trying to solve multiple mysteries surrounding his own identity says he's made a lot of progress in the 8 years since his quest began.
Now, the I-Team was first to report about the strange case of Paul Fronczak, who used a DNA test to confirm that he isn't the person that he always thought himself to be.
But what became of the real Paul Fronczak? George Knapp has the latest.
When I started this, everyone said, don't waste your time. Remember, they said, you won't find Paul. You won't find out who you are.
Nevadan Paul Fronczak began his seemingly improbable quest 8 years ago.
I'm going to do this.
That's when he first reached out to us after the results of DNA tests turned his world upside down. The tests confirmed he wasn't a Fronczak after all.
There's no remote possibility that you are the Fronczak baby. And I was like, wow.
The real Paul Fronczak had been kidnapped from a Chicago hospital in 1964, one day after his birth, snatched by a mystery woman dressed as a nurse. The crime sparked a nationwide search and worldwide headlines, but was never solved. 2 years later, a toddler found abandoned in New Jersey was shown to the still grieving parents Dora and Chester Fronczak, who accepted the boy as their missing son, adopted him, and raised him in a loving home. As he grew older, though, Paul suspected something wasn't quite right. In 2012, he coaxed his parents into taking DNA tests. The results shocked them. Paul contacted us and vowed to find not only the kidnapped baby, but also his own biological family.
You've learned so much in those 8 years, but every road you go down, it leads to darker and darker questions.
Yeah, this whole journey has been one step forward, 2 steps back. You know, we get close to something and maybe someone dies the day we're supposed to meet.
Thousands of tips from the public have poured into Fronczak's websites. He wrote a book about his search, The Foundling. In 2018, in the small town of Manton, Michigan, news stories about the Fronczak mystery struck a chord with one family. The adult children of a Manton man took DNA tests of their own and came to the conclusion that their father was the real Paul Fronczak. They reached out to the Fronczak family in Chicago. The FBI was informed, and the word spread in their small community.
Hey, it's Paul in Vegas. How you doing?
Investigators working with Nevada's Paul Fronczak did their own legwork. DNA results were compared. All indications are the man in Manton was the baby kidnapped in 1964. In December 2019, the I-Team was first to report that the Fronczak baby was alive and living in Michigan. Our affiliate station, WGN in Chicago, followed our clues and found the man in Manton. He confirmed his identity to the reporters, but asked that his name be kept private. Now, in his first interview in more than a year, Nevada's Paul Fronczak says he is keeping a promise to biological Paul.
And I can't give his name out yet because it's just not a good time. But I will say that my mom got to talk to him.
During our interview, we showed him a recent news article and photo of the man in Manton.
We didn't release the name, but I did see this a couple of weeks ago. It's an obituary notice with his name on it, and there's a photo. I don't know if you've seen that photo, but and you can't comment on whether that's him. But is there a family resemblance?
Definitely. Definitely a resemblance.
The photo in question was included in an obituary notice. The name of the deceased is Kevin Beatty, who was reportedly born in Michigan in 1964 and died of cancer earlier this year. From what we've learned, Kevin Beatty was the kidnapped infant, Paul Fronczak. The FBI in Chicago is aware of his identity, but declined to acknowledge it publicly, saying it has an ongoing investigation and is asking for privacy for the victims. Nevada's Paul Fronczak won't confirm the identity, except to say he's relieved that his long-suffering mom, Dora Fronczak, was able to speak with biological Paul earlier this year, shortly before Kevin Beatty died.
I've reached out to the real Paul and his children. And I sent the real Paul my book, and I heard from my my tipsters that he read the book, he liked it, and he let his friends read it. But as far as communicating with me, nothing.
George Knapp, 8 News Now.
And by the way, Paul Fronczak found his birth family and learned that he has a twin sister, but she's missing and may have been murdered. We're going to have more on that story tomorrow. We do have links to additional information on our website at 8newsnow.com.
Now, most of the tips along the way had proved fruitless, but to catch you up, 2 years ago in the small town of Manton, Michigan, news stories about the Fronczaks mystery struck a chord with one family. The adult children of a Manton man took a DNA test of their own and came to the conclusion that their father was the real Paul Fronczak. They reached out to the Fronczak family in Chicago, and the FBI was informed, and the word spread in their small community. So this Michigan man does in fact seem to be the true, real Paul Fronczak. His name is Kevin Ray Beatty, and sadly, he recently passed away at 56 years old. But he was informed that he was the real Paul. He did read the book, The Foundling, from the fake Paul, Jack, and he did wind up having a phone conversation with Dora, his natural birth mother. His obituary shows a birthday of March 14th, 1964. He died on April 25th, 2020. At least Dora was able to get a hold of him and speak to him before he passed away. He passed away at the young age of 56. Now, remember, Paul has a brother that is the biological child of Chester and Dora. Fake Paul's sibling that he was raised with made a post online and asked to have it reposted and reposted. It says, please repost, especially if you live in the Midwest or Michigan. This is Kevin Beatty of Manton, Michigan. Kevin Beatty. He's showing a picture of him. I'm looking for any information on the woman that raised him. She kidnapped him from my parents in 1964 from a hospital in Chicago, Illinois. She kept him in Chicago for a number of years before returning to Manton, Michigan, where I believe she had other relatives and estranged children. He has never left that small, isolated town. Literally nobody is helping my family understand who this woman was, where they lived, or what their lives were like. The FBI has abandoned the case despite knowing much more about her. They wrongly placed another baby into my parents' arms in 1966 that had been abandoned in New Jersey to close the case. This woman is dead, but the Beatty family is covering it up to hold on to memories of their grandma. They have no remorse for her actions or understanding for the agony my parents suffered over 50 years and have had little contact with my mom or I since I discovered them almost a year and a half ago. Jessica Beatty Lonfrenier and Megan Beatty Hooker are two of his daughters living in Michigan. Kendra Beatty is his youngest daughter living in Chicago. All I've asked from them is to know who their grandmother was and help us learn what happened to my brother, who was stolen from my mother's arms when he was 36 hours old. They haven't told me a thing about her. If she were innocent, it would be quite easy to prove. I plead for any mother reading this to imagine that happening to them and help my mom and I find some answers. Jessica's husband, Matt Lafreniere, actually texted me to stop bothering them. He says, she is dead, the story is over, was the text. I'd like anyone reading this to imagine the family of a felon saying that to you. despite her crime, simply because she was dead, as if the crime never happened or impacted anyone. Very powerful, very angry, and rightly so. Give some freaking information. Jeez. Also, those of you that do numbers need to look at some of this. Kevin actually never had his correct birth date of April 25th, 1964. But look at the day he died, April 26, 2020, one day after his true birthday. Then again, weird coincidence with the not real Paul that was raised by Dora, who found out they actually share a birthday. I just think it's crazy. Weird, right? Now, I was able to do some more research online, and there is talk that someone by the name of Lori Beatty was the kidnapper. But it's hard-pressed to find any existence of this person. It is said she kidnapped Paul and let Lorraine and Robert Fountain raise him. But as I dig deeper, Lorraine was married more than once, I think 5 times, and went by several names. At the time of the abduction, she was married to someone with the name of Aldrich, which would have been marriage number 5, I believe. I think we really need to dig deeper on Lorraine, because she appears to have the answers and appears to be the kidnapper, clearly, in my opinion. So we need to look deeper on Lorraine. If anybody finds anything, let me know. So she passed away, though, in 2004. She also had adult children at the time of the kidnapping. She was about 43 at the time of the kidnapping, and she had children that I believe were 19 and 22. So it does fit with the description of her, being in their 40s with dark green hair. Now, Kevin's sister is still alive. She still claims her mom didn't do it, that she would never fit in a nurse's uniform because she was quite large-breasted. I don't know about that one. I'm pretty sure nurses' uniforms are made just like clothes, and you can be large-breasted to be a nurse, or small-breasted or whatever. Really weird. But, okay. She did go by different names, they said, and for some reason, no one questioned it. So she did use a different name. She was married 5 times. She is hard to follow because of all of that, for sure. Now, stay with me. Once Paul, Jack, found out who he was, he now knows that he had a twin sister, like we mentioned. This is still a big mystery because it's still unknown. Now, their biological parents, Jack and Jill's biological parents, were Gilbert Ronald Rosenthal and Marie Louise Duncan Rosenthal. There is a deceased daughter by the name of Kathryn Rosenthal, who was born on January 9th, 1963, and she died at age 47 on May 1st, 2010. So Jack and Jill definitely had siblings. They had Sharon, who was born in 1961, Karen was born in 1963, and Jack and Jill were born in October of 1963. It's very close in age. Ronald was born in February of 1965. Would love to know where all of them are, really. So this story is still unfolding. Paul, Jack, states in a video clip that I've linked below from the Geneology group that helped put this all together. They helped Paul, Jack, find his identity and the missing Paul. Paul says in that video that he believes that they will find Jill or what happened to her. He does allude to thinking she's dead at some point, but then circles back a little bit that maybe she's alive. We will continue to update this as news unfolds, because it is definitely a Left Undone story. Paul also mentions that a movie is in the works. Thank you for watching Left Undone Incomplete Investigations. Please subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and there will be more to come. Ring the bell for notifications, and don't forget, we go live every Saturday morning. Thank you for watching. I'm Kathryn. Be safe. Stay well. See you soon.